All right. Well, you should have the little handout. It's also in the drive if you want that. But what I tried to do is essentially just think about what I've learned about preparing Bible teachings on various levels over the last 10, 15 years. So just so you know, a little bit of my trajectory. I started out, I think the first opportunity I ever had to lead something was here at the church, leading singles meetings, or college kind of age meetings at age 19, 20, 21. But it was not a large church, nor was it a large college ministry. And I remember thinking, how many chairs should I set up for the study? And thinking, like putting 5 chairs out and being like, is that too many? Is that not enough? So that's, that was my first experience teaching the Bible. Was much more just almost in a circle, walking people through passages of scripture. Then I was a community group leader for a while at the church for college age people. And then eventually started teaching some on Sundays, but more formally as the singles ministry kind of became an actual sort of formal meeting with worship and teaching and all that stuff. Started teaching it that regularly. And so I think it's funny, man, I was thinking, I've taught the Bible in so many weird contexts. I've tried to teach the Bible at a youth camp where these 2 youth, I could see them progressively becoming closer and closer together. And they started making out like right where Mark is during the meeting. And I'm like trying to teach the Bible. And I just remember thinking, this is not what I signed up for. I have taught through translation in Mexico multiple times. And at one point, the singles ministry at one of the church I was at thought it would be hilarious to have me sing the song La Bamba before I taught the Bible, which was a surprise to me. And they thought it would be hilarious. And it was hilarious because I don't know any of the words other than Baila, baila, la bamba, poco de gracia. I don't know. Who knows the verses of La Bamba? I don't know the verses of La Bamba. So anyway, just been a weird, broad experience over the years. So what I tried to do is think through all of those various contexts of teaching the Bible, from community group to like a handful of people around the Word to a big, large meeting. What are the sort of universal principles? So that's what I tried to come up with. And I've grouped them by section. The first one is preparation. So the first section is preparation. And the first tip I have is get your earliest ideas and burdens out on paper, then set them aside until later in your preparation. And the reason I say this is early on, I think I was guilty of what David Helm was talking about, where I had a burden in search of a text rather than a text giving me the burden to share with people. And so I definitely did a lot of that. But then I think I, for a while, overcorrected to where sometimes, for example, if you're teaching a group, you might have a heart for them. You might have some things you want to encourage them with. But if you just ignore that and just prepare the text, by the time you get to the application, you might have forgotten what your original burden was. And I've seen that happen with guys, that after spending so long, like, Mark, in the study where you're looking at the intricacies of different things, at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I really had a burden in my heart for these youth, but I don't remember what it was. So the way I've tried to resolve it is by saying, okay, whatever your burden is, whatever your heart is, it's good. Like if you're going to lead a study, it's good. Write that down, but get it on paper and then put it aside, and then revisit it in the application section. That's one tip. Second, break your prep into smaller, manageable goals. So, when I'm the kind of person where it feels overwhelming if my to-do list just says write a sermon, because it's such a bear, right? Or do a teaching, write a whole teaching. And so what I've found helpful is to break it up into sections. So here are some of the sections I've got. They're very similar to the Simeon Trust kind of journey sections. So understand the text. That's kind of the first half of Simeon Trust. Getting the structure, getting the context. And then get to determining the main point for the original audience, apply the gospel, and then determine the main point for today. So that's kind of the second big section. The third then is develop your teaching outline. The fourth is then write up the manuscript or your detailed outline. And then fifth is revise. So what I'm trying to do is, one, give myself some momentum as I go, rather than feeling like I just have this huge to-do hanging over me. And I would often think all I've done is research the text and break down the outline. But if my only goal is write a sermon, it feels like, well, I still haven't hit that. But if I have sub-goals, if I'm like, I'm going to read as much as I can about the text, get the outline, then I'm already 2 steps into 5 steps. Does that make sense? So breaking it down that way is helpful for me. And then third, relatedly, I think it's helpful sometimes to set time limits for those sections. So part of the challenge is every sermon could take an unlimited amount of time. You will always be limited, or a study. Like I was talking to a community group leader a number of years ago, and I was asking, hey, how much time do you spend in prep? Like reading the text before the sermon, before community group. And they were like, I don't know, like an hour over lunch break, kind of look at it, pray over it. And then another guy in the room was like, what? I'm spending like 6 to 7 hours on the text. And you're like, whoa, like what, I don't know if we're intending for you to do that, but I think it illustrates that that's true on every level. Like when you preach a sermon, I regularly will talk to, semi-regularly, to young pastors trying to do the best they can with these principles, but they are spending like 30 hours on a sermon. And I'm like, brother, I don't think that's faithful. Like if you have 40 hours in a week and you're spending 30 hours on a sermon, what are you, like, when are you meeting with people? When are you pastoring? When are you governing? When are you organizing? Like there's other things you have to give attention to. So because of that, I think we need to set a limit. You need to decide, okay, you're being asked to teach in a context or lead a study in a context. Realistically, how much time do you have to prepare? So you got to get that understanding first, and then start breaking down what you're going to do in those hours. Because it's easy, for example, for one of the pieces to just run away with you. That you end up researching the text. Say you got 8 hours to prepare a study. You can end up researching the text for 7 hours. And then all of a sudden, you're under the gun trying to get something down on paper before the study. Where I'm like, no, you gotta set some sub goals. So here would be an 8 hour, a sample suggested 8 hour section. Spending 2 hours understanding the text, 1 hour identifying the main point, 1 hour developing the outline, 2 to 3 hours to actually write the whole manuscript or detailed outline, and then 1 hour to revise. So it seems like a reasonable, faithful way to spend 8 hours. Then what if you have 1 hour? What if you're leading a study, or you just have to, somebody asked you to speak at, this happened to Vogan. They asked if they could do a quinceañera service at the church, and Vogan from like New York had never been to a quinceañera service, so he didn't know that there was like a message, like a lot of the time. And so they were like, we have, like the day before, they were like, and so we have about 20 minutes for you to to share. And he was like, I got what? Like, is that enough time? And he's thinking like, I don't even know if I'm going to have 20 minutes of material. So that'll happen. So you say you've only got I've got an hour to lead this study. You can still break it down. You can still go, I got 20 minutes to understand, 20 minutes to get to the main point, 10 minutes to, come up with some kind of outline. And if you only have an hour, I would suggest spending 10 minutes just praying, because that's not a lot of time that you're going to need the Lord. So that would be my breakdown. That's a takeoff on what Wayne Grudem told us. One time, Wayne Grudem, the guy who wrote the systematic theology we use a lot, he said, you can, if you have some basic understanding of the Bible, you can lead people through any text in the Bible in 10 minutes. It's not ideal, but you can do it. And he broke out, I would do 2 minutes of this, 1 minute of this, 2 minutes is 1 minute. And then there was like a minute left. And we're like, I think that's only 9 minutes, Dr. Grudem. And he goes, well, the last minute you're going to pray because that's only 10 minutes. That's not a lot of time to prepare. It's like, thanks, doctor. So that's my homage to Dr. Grudem. So does that make sense? So setting out your goals and then setting about how much time you've got, I think at least serves me. All right, next section, presentation. This is not as big of a deal in this particular group because you guys like to talk a little bit more than some ladies in the women's cohort. But I will say this, if at any point you find yourself anxious about speaking in public, leading in public, doing something in public, really, this is very true. The best cure for public speaking anxiety is speaking in public. There really is, there's no shortcut. It's doing things like speaking up in community group, volunteering to teach a short Bible study, giving a testimony in front of the church. And a lot of times, even if you're not afraid of speaking in public, that anxiety, that butterfly in the stomach of I'm not sure if this is going to go well, what if this happens, what if that happens? The way to get over that is almost by proving your anxiety wrong. Because your anxiety will go, what if you make a fool of yourself? And you will, but everyone will still love you, Or what if I say the wrong thing? And you will, but you can clarify it, right? So you kind of just get through, it's okay. The things you're afraid of will probably happen, but you'll see that there's life after them. And that'll help as you go.
I actually embrace it.
Yeah.
I really do.
That's good.
When I'm not nervous, it's like, this is not going to go good.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just don't feel like I care enough. Or
Sure.
I'm not, when I feel the anxiety, it's like, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Are you guys getting warm? Or are you okay?
Okay.
All right? Okay, good. I don't know. I just
The
started.
guy with the shorts.
Well, I started feeling you getting warm, Mark?
I'm all right.
Because I just started to feel the sun come back out and start coming through. So this room heats up fast once. So maybe you want to turn it just a little bit on, Sal, preventatively.
It's going to blow right on him. It always does.
Just a little bit.
It's freezing.
Oh, you can press the vent up so it aims up a little bit. So turn it on. No? Okay, I guess not. Doesn't like Sal. There you go.
Yeah, it's on. And then just, if you want to go up with the temp, obviously.
Sweet. All right. Next tip is, and feel free to cut it off, Sal and Noah, whenever you want to. Next tip is, know your teaching strengths and weaknesses. So if you have a sense of what you're good at naturally and what you're not good at naturally, it will really help both in prepping your message and in delivering your message or study. So what I mean in prep, you're going to be wired a certain way. In the women's cohort, one of the ladies was sharing is, if you give her time, she'll always go to application. And one of the other ladies was sharing, if you give her time, she'll always go to more study of the text, right? So just knowing where you're gonna flow naturally will help with the earlier step of setting your time blocks. Like if, for example, if you're tempted to skip over application kind of stuff, then putting it into part of your prep schedule will force you to think about it and not just keep studying. You actually have to give it to, or if you don't love study, you love the practical nuts and bolts, putting some time in there will force you to study before moving on. Does that make sense? So that's in the prep side. And then in the presentation side, just having a sense of your strengths and weaknesses as a speaker is really helpful. For example, if you are often told to speak up, or if you're a little soft-spoken, which I know Mark, a lot of people have said that it's like, speak up, brother. No, just kidding. If you are soft-spoken, you're gonna have to practice being a little bit more, assertive in that moment. Because part of it is you're leading people through a study or teaching, so you have to take control of the plane. Right? You got to steer it. So if that's your strength, or if that's a weakness, do that. And then sometimes people will be great at reading, but really struggle once they get away from their notes. And if that's the case, it's okay to have detailed notes or a manuscript. I think you want to use the way God's wired you. So there are guys that really well-known public preachers and teachers, they read their manuscript. And they read it expressively. They do a good job reading it. It doesn't feel like they're reading the phone book. But getting out of the manuscript, they're just not good on the fly. They're not great at making jokes, when something happens in the room. They're just not. And so you got to understand your strengths and weaknesses and know, okay, if I do better reading and having material, then I'm going to do that. The other one is maybe you're not a great reader, but you are good at storytelling or speaking without notes. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have to think through what I've told some folks is, or encourage some folks that have that kind of makeup, is you're going to probably want to still read some of the sections in your message that have to do with, that require precision. So if you're breaking down a part of the text or breaking down a theological nuance, you don't want to do that stuff off the cuff, right? You don't want to be just kind of loosey-goosey with the Trinity, right? If you're trying to explain from John 1, the Word was with God and the Word was God, and he was with God if you're breaking down the Trinity, do not just do it extemporaneously. Unless you're really, Bruce Ware or somebody. I would read that, but look for places in your teaching or study that you can tell a story and move away from your notes, or share an application or some questions and move away from your notes and then get back into them. Does that make sense? So knowing, it takes some trial and error, but knowing what your strengths are and your weaknesses are will help you lean into your strengths, which is where you want to, and then mitigate some of your weaknesses, if that makes sense. And if you don't know what your strengths are, my number one tip is ask other people around you. It's really helpful. Often, especially when it comes to public speaking or interpersonal speaking, you want to ask people what it's like to hear you share or speak or teach or lead. Greg Dernberger, who Sal and I both know, says you as a leader, you need to know what it's like to sit across from you. Like, you need to know, if you're leading a study, what is it like to be led by Rob or Mark or Noah? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What comes naturally to them? What might be confusing? And you've got to have that. But sometimes the only way to get that is by asking the people across from you. What is it like to be in the room when I'm leading a community group study? And it's sometimes humbling, because I've done those 360 kind of evaluations where you're going, it's always humbling when we do 360 evaluations semi-frequently as a staff, like at least once a year, I would say. And when the same thing comes up on multiple evaluations, you're like, oh, that really is a problem. So one of them was, it was unsurprising to you guys, was that I can be distractible in a meeting. And especially when I'm not talking. Because when I'm talking, I'm engaged, right? But it's easy to see my attention just drift, right? And it's not subtle. The feedback I got was there are times where with some people, they can kind of go, and be thinking about something else. But with me, you can feel me just like looking around. Yeah. And so understanding when you're teaching or leading, what are your strengths and weaknesses? So ask people. And last I would just say is, don't try to imitate every trend or imitate every speaker you love may have totally different strengths and weaknesses than you do. Yeah. And that's really helpful to understand, because there was a moment, I think 10, 15 years ago when I started preaching, that some of these guys, that were like intense and assertive, like the Driscolls, Mark Driscolls, or the Matt Chandlers. They'll like yell at people and like shake people in their seats. Were kind of getting big. And I remember thinking, man, I wish I could be more like that. And then I think I forget how, but basically Jen, my wife, helped me just see, you're just not wired that way. You're not going to be a hyper, I mean, you can be strong, but you're just not going to be a punk rock rebel, kind of vibe in the pulpit. And it's not going to work. This is really helpful because like I know a lot of quotes from Pride and Prejudice. I probably Mark Driscoll doesn't know a lot of quotes from Pride and Prejudice, but I do. Okay, so I got to use what I got, and I just used them all at the wedding I officiated on Saturday. All right, so that's good. All right, let me do a couple more in this section. 6, I really encourage when you're leading, especially if you're not doing an interactive Bible study, if you're doing a presentation of some kind, I would, number 6, really encourage you to say it out loud, to read it out loud. Read the notes, read the manuscript out loud. It is going to be weird at first, but it will rapidly improve your manuscript. Because one of the difficulties of writing a message or a sermon or a testimony and then presenting it is you write in a written environment, but those listening to you hear it in an oral environment. So the written word and the spoken word feel different. Where things written down seem overly repetitive, they do not seem overly repetitive spoken. And so having a sense of how does this sound and learning to write for reading it aloud is a totally different animal. So the more you do that, the better you'll get. And I would also say, if you really want to grow fast, record yourself and watch it back, which is brutal. Mm-hmm. And have you done it, Rob?
I have done it.
Oh.
Yeah, it's super hard to listen to yourself.
Yeah.
What I like better is I practice with my wife, like whether it's
okay.
a job interview,
okay.
or if it's a presentation.
Yes.
Because she has good feedback. And
good.
I don't have to listen to myself.
Yeah, that's great.
Once I kind of get it down, then lots of times I'm driving to work and I'm talking to myself in the car.
Yeah.
Because when you start to talk, you hear yourself talk, you're like, oh, that doesn't sound right. Let me try it this way. And the more you can practice, the better.
Yes, exactly. I do know one pastor in our family of churches that I got to know recently. He was sharing that he likes to do his preparation in coffee shops. His sermon prep or study prep. And so I was asking him, do you practice saying it out loud? And he was like, yeah, I do. And I was like, where? He said, oh, in the coffee shop. I just don't do it loud. So I'll just say, not sure, ask others. They often see your strengths more clearly than you do. Also, don't try to imitate every. So I'm like, so you're just in the coffee shop? It's like, well, I got my earbuds in,
That's
so I'm just
you.
Yeah, and I'm just like, so you just hear some guy whispering in the corner.
I'm guessing he gets a lot of free lattes.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is he said, part of it is he does it because the baristas are kind of his mission field. They're the people he tries to connect with and build relationships with. But I thought, I bet they're building relationships just because they are freaked out. There's some guy whispering in the corner, sir, are you okay? Yeah, anyway.
Subliminally getting the word of God.
Yes, that's right.
It's
reading it out loud, baby.
I've heard that before.
Where have I heard that? Yeah. All right, last one. 7. Read the room. So match your tone and your presence to the setting. This matters for both context and audience. Context means speaking to a big auditorium is just going to feel different than leading in a small group. So for me, leading a Bible study with 4 folding chairs is going to be real different than, I remember in real time how vivid this was. I was speaking years ago at a homeschool graduation. When I graduated, this is the first homeschool graduation I got asked to do in years. I was homeschooled. When we graduated, there was like 20 people and it was like in a living room or something, you know what I mean? Or we'd get an auditorium, but it would just be like a handful of friends and family. This was like 12 people all graduating together. There were hundreds of people in attendance. So in the moment, I'm having to recalibrate. I expected 30 people. There's lights, there's stage lighting, there's video presentations. And I'm really in the moment having to look at my manuscript and go, okay, this is going to feel way more like a graduation speech, like in front of the lawn at the college than let me just give you some encouragement before you head out off into the wild blue yonder. So this really does matter. So the context, knowing that in advance is helpful. And then remembering your audience. What are their age? What's their education? Do they have a background on what you're talking about or not? Is this brand new to them or is it very familiar to them? Like all that stuff you're trying to think through. And I think Rob and your community group were a good example of that from, I think, a year ago, where you're realizing you're trying to lead studies too high level for the group that you had,
Right.
and having to kind of bring it all the way back down. So great example in that, Rob.
Actually, a quick side question.
Yeah, please.
Do you take into account in your context that you have a radio program when you're preparing, or do you just like my main focus is
No.
right here, the people in front of me, and then however it comes off?
Yeah, I don't usually.
Okay.
I don't usually think about the radio program. I will think about it in retrospect when I pick which of the two messages we use, and I will usually use whatever message was more precise rather than which one felt better in the room. Because sometimes you can speak the right words in the room and the room just feels like people are engaged. And that's the other thing I didn't put in, but reading the room is helpful, is you've got to also, while you're speaking, make adjustments. Like if you can just tell people are looking at you quizzically, like this, you're going to have to go, okay, something's not clicking. Is there a way I can try to back up and pause here? Or I've also seen guys get too far disconnected emotionally from the group of people that they're leading. And what I mean by that is they will be immersed in the text. They'll be praying over it. They'll cry over it. And so when they get in the pulpit, they are like fired up. But the people, they're going in cold. They never read this text before, So if you're like crying while you read the passage, they may not go with you yet. They may be like, whoa, is this everything okay? Rather than, you got to kind of have to lead them into where you got affected through the message. And then the other thing, dude, is stuff happens. Reading the room there will be interruptions, especially in small group kind of contexts. There will be a kid that just freaks out. There will be stuff that happens. There'll be just a medical emergency, whatever. So you have to just make the adjustment in that moment. What's the best thing? Is it to repeat what I said because I think everybody missed it? Is it to get to the next good point to kind of summarize? Where do I go?
Dogs looking for bacon.
Yeah, gosh, man. All right, just a couple more. Application. I think application gets a lot easier if you have the FCF and the IRE, which we've talked a little bit about. But the FCF is the fallen condition focus. It's basically what in our fallen human condition is the text aimed at? What part of it? So, for example, I don't know if you guys heard Tony's message on Sunday, Philippians 4. Do you guys remember the part of our fallen condition the text was aimed at? Anybody? Do not be blank.
Anxious.
Yes. So it's in the text right there. So it's the fallen condition that is out of line as a result of the fall is that we're given a sinful anxiety. So that's really helpful when it's spelled out in the text. But you also could get the fallen condition from, what's the beginning of the text? Oh shoot, I'm losing it. It's my Bible. Read the beginning of that section of Philippians 4, if you would. I think it was it 4:10?
I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at length Wait, am I in the right spot?
Trust in the Lord always. Again,
Yeah,
I was-
Rejoice in the Lord always.
Yeah.
And again, I say
Then
rejoice.
I say rejoice.
Okay.
The reason is known to everyone, the Lord is at hand.
Okay. So rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. So if we only had that, you could still determine the fallen condition. Because whenever there's a command in the Bible, there's a command given to adjust something. So you're kind of looking at it negatively and going, I think we may not rejoice when we should. That might be the fallen condition focus. Then the second one is the intended redemptive effect, where it's taking you. So where it hits you and where it takes you are the two things you're looking for. So in Philippians 4, the target is do not be anxious. And the intended redemptive effect is rejoice in the Lord, right? And so the text, like Tony did a good job, taking us on a journey from fear and anxiety up to joy and rejoicing by trusting in the Lord that he is at hand, right? Mm-hmm. So once you have those two, all of a sudden, all your application gets a lot clearer. You're asking, is my application aimed at the fearful, grumbly, if you remember his illustration, the grumpy dwarf part of my life, of our lives as humans? And then does it take us forward to where the Lord wants us to be? So if you get that, man, it gets a lot easier. And then illustration. I thought it's interesting. So Tony used two different prominent illustrations, and I'm curious if you guys remember either of them. I just mentioned one. I gave you the answer. The grumpy dwarf. Oh, and his granddaughter, right? So those are the two that I remember as well. The grumpy dwarf and the granddaughter. Now, what's interesting is one of those, the grumpy dwarf, illustrates the fallen condition focus. So grumpy dwarf, he uses it at the very beginning of the message to paint his target. The grumpy dwarf inside all of us, right? But the granddaughter story is a hopeful picture of where the text is taking us. That even with your granddaughter hurt, even in that moment of uncertainty, you can rejoice in the Lord as a pathway toward peace because you know that he's at hand. And so basically, his main two illustrations, one gave you the fallen condition focus and one gave you the intended redemptive effect. Because you leave the message going, I want to be like Tony, who even when it's tough, fights to rejoice and trust in the Lord. That's where I want to be. I don't want to be like Grumpy Dwarf, who grumbles and is anxious all the time. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, on the illustration, I think Tony got those two illustrations in two different ways. And so I call one style of illustration fishing and one trawling. So fishing is when you know what you need and you go look for it. So you're going, what's a time in my life that I have been tempted to grumble or be anxious, but have fought to trust and remember the Lord is at hand and rejoice? And so probably he immediately thought of his granddaughter. Like, man, I felt that, as he's describing it, I could feel it. I could remember my son in the hospital. And so I think but to go fishing, you got to know what you're trying to catch. I remember being so frustrated when I went fishing with Tom and my dad because I wanted to use lures that I thought were cool and fun. And they were like, that's not what's biting. That's not what's in this lake. And I'm like, but I like this one. And they're like, it doesn't matter. It's the wrong bait. So part of it is you might come up with, and you've probably heard a sermon like this or a study like this, that the guy has a great story and it has nothing to do with the text, or it's only tangentially related to the text. And if, you realize what was the problem? Well, the problem was it was a great illustration, but it wasn't an illustration of the text or its application. It was just a story. And so knowing the FCF and the IRE give you what you need to go find. Now, that's one method. Second is trawling. This is what I call trawling. Trawling is like where they put the nets out and then they just boat and they just pull everything in and then discard stuff. I bet you anything, I didn't ask him about this, but I bet you anything Tony got the grumpy dwarf illustration while he was doing message prep over that week. Because you imagine, he's like waking up, he's getting his coffee mug, he's thinking about Philippians 4, and I bet at some point it came together for him. Like, this is who this text is for. Because this is me, I'm not digging it. And that's, I think, the other thing that happens, it's helpful, is that earlier you can prep your study or your teaching or whatever it is, the more time you've got to let stuff stick to you that might be usable. So if you're doing it like the Saturday morning or Saturday evening special, preaching at church the next day, your window to capture good illustrations is going to be like this, right? But if you know you're going to be teaching on something in a week or 2 weeks, then you've got a lot of time to capture stuff. And the last thing I would just say on illustrations is make the connections obvious. So you can't be obvious and you can't be too obvious. You have to say, this is Grumpy Dwarf. And then don't assume people get the connection between Philippians 4 and Grumpy Dwarf. You have to say, Grumpy Dwarf is an example of a restless, grumbling anxiety that I see in myself, we see in all of us, and that's what Paul is addressing in Philippians 4. So the sentence before and after your illustration are the two things that really determine whether that illustration works. So spend time making sure the connection's obvious here and here. And then last ones I'll go through brief. Remember, your ability is not your identity. It's really easy to let your performance become your self-worth. Even in prep, if you don't even think your preparation's going well, you start to go, I'm just no good at this. I can't do this. This is going to be a disaster. And what happens is we quickly conflate our ability and our identity together. I'm a bad teacher. Or if it's going great, we might unhelpfully go the other way. I'm a great teacher. This is going to kill at that Bible study. But that one Bible guy, he's never even heard of something like this. And you're like, oh man, like all of a sudden now you're in a place of pride and self-righteousness that the Lord's not going to use that either. So remember, your ability is not your identity. I think mostly though, we struggle on I don't think I'm good. I don't think this is going to be good. I think I'm a failure. And just remember these basic truths. You're a child of God. You're loved. You're redeemed. You are secure. None of your identity changes with your teaching performance. Your teaching performance doesn't determine whether God saves you. Grace determines that, right? It's not going to determine whether you go live with him forever in eternity. Jesus Christ and his work has determined that. 14, your skill is not the power. So it's so helpful to remember that we want to work hard to make the teaching effective, but the power of the teaching is the word, not our persuasion, not our ability, not our illustration, not our compelling presence. It's the word. So it's totally possible to preach a bad sermon, technically, that is faithful to the text and the Lord use it. I remember years ago, I got a severe raging sinus infection, and I was supposed to go speak at this college retreat in Panama City, Florida. So I arrive, I feel horrible. My mouth is my sinuses are on fire. I have a pounding headache. I go through the teaching. As I'm teaching, I'm like, this isn't good. It's just not good. Objectively, I'm not delivering it well. The preparation was subpar because I was feeling it during the week. And I'm not saving it with this performance. And it was just kind of like, wow, I think that was the worst sermon I've ever preached. And then a guy comes up and he goes, I want to give my life to the Lord. How can I be saved? Because it was about the fatherhood of God. And I was like, I want God as my father, and I don't think he is. And I'm like, bro, okay. And so it was that moment you're super aware. That was not, I didn't persuade him of this. It was reading the text a bunch that the Lord used, and now he's a child of God.
It's happened several times where I think I hit a home run of a message.
Yeah,
And it's like,
that happens as well.
Not impactful at all. And then there's and people were like, wow, that really impacted my
Yeah.
really helped my faith. It really, like,
Well, and it's helpful because then you're remembering the power is the word.
yeah,
So our best prep is just to try to platform the word
yeah,
and get out of the way.
yeah.
Holy Spirit thing.
Yeah. All right, last one. Just helpful to remember: success is measured in changed lives, not in applause or impressing anybody. Our goal is not to impress anybody. The goal is not that you lead a Bible study and people go, "Man, that was really impressive. I'm really impressed by that guy." It's like we as Bible teachers should go, "I don't care."
That's right.
It's possible to impress everybody and they not change. And that's not good. But it's also possible that nobody's impressed, but there's a profound life change moment. And that's what we want. So there's my brief overview of what I've learned with teaching.